They say war dead don't speak, but this train screamed its secret in silence. April 13th, 1945. The war was dying, but death still rode the rails. Lieutenant Thomas Harper's tank rumbled across the broken German countryside, the remnants of a fractured Reich crumbling under the weight of the Allies. His orders were simple: push forward, avoid delays, finish the fight. But nothing prepared Harper for the ghost that awaited them near Magdeburg. Through the haze of smoke and rubble, a long, blackened line appeared on the track, a train unlike any they'd seen before. No flags waved, no guards patrolled at first glance, just a massive, seemingly abandoned freight train curling across the rails like a serpent through the ruins. Harper's instincts screamed, danger. Something was wrong. The tank's hatch cracked open. They climbed out, half expecting an ambush, but met only deafening silence. And then the doors were forced open. Inside, rows of emaciated prisoners, eyes hollow, bodies chained, skin translucent. Dead faces mingled with the living, a human freight of agony. They had been trapped for weeks. The death train was a rolling tomb. Nazi officials had crammed prisoners from the liberated camps onto this train, attempting to flee justice. No one thought to save them. No one thought they'd survive. Harper's crew scrambled. They had no protocols for this nightmare, no manual for humanity under fire. Behind the walls and rusted steel, history writhed in pain and fear. This was no longer a war about territory or victory. It became a fight for souls, and the battle to free this train held the key to the final chapter of a crumbling empire and a shattered world. The sun had just begun to dip below the shattered horizon, casting long, haunting shadows over the ruined landscape around Magdeburg. Lieutenant Thomas Harper's tank rumbled carefully to a stop near the grim silhouette of the train, its dark metal sides etched with rust and scarred by war. Across the barren fields, the stench of smoke and decay lingered like a suffocating fog. Harper climbed out of his tank, the cold seeping through his uniform, his breath forming icy clouds that vanished into the twilight. His crew followed silently, the weight of what lay ahead pressing on everyone's soul. The train loomed ahead, a horrifying vessel of death and despair. The prisoners inside were beyond recognition, their bodies gaunt and skeletal, skin pulled tightly over bones, marred with bruises and open sores. Many were barely conscious, their eyes wide and glazed with the raw terror of months spent enduring unimaginable cruelty. Harper's heart hammered as he forced open the heavy metal doors. Inside, silence greeted them, a silence so thick it seemed to scream. The prisoners barely responded. Some whispered prayers, others were still too broken to move. The air was cold and stale, trapped in the cramped carriages. Nearby, the distant rumble of enemy tanks and the sharp bark of machine guns reminded them that the war was far from over. German troops, some fanatical SS officers, were still patrolling the borders, determined to silence any witnesses to the Nazi horrors. "There's no time, men," Harper barked, voice tight with urgency. "Secure the perimeter. Get those people out of here." The crew scrambled, unloading supplies brought hastily by the accompanying medics and soldiers, blankets, bandages, food, and water. Yet none of it felt enough. The prisoners were ghosts, lost to starvation and illness, many too weak to even grasp a helping hand. As Harper moved from carriage to carriage, he met faces that told entire histories. A mother clutching her child, a young man trembling uncontrollably, eyes darting like a hunted animal. Each person carried the weight of death, yet clung desperately to life. Robert Jenkins, the medic, was a whirlwind of compassion. Under incessant fire, he crawled through the carnage to tend to wounds, soothing panic with soft words and gentle hands. His face was smeared with dirt and sweat, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. Outside, the Patriots' line faltered under a sudden barrage from a hidden German sniper's nest. Bullets shredded the air, and men fell, some coughing and screaming, others silently going cold. When reinforcements arrived for the enemy, Harper knew the moment had come. He rallied his troops, barking out commands amid the roar of artillery shells and gunfire. "Hold your ground! For these people, we cannot lose this fight!" The battle was savage. Tanks exchanged fire at dangerous close range. Infantry clashed in the ruins, each street corner a choke point soaked with sweat and blood. The soldiers fought with desperation fueled by terror and hope entwined. Harper found himself protecting a small group of prisoners caught outside the train, shielding them with his own body as bullets stitched the air around. Every step forward was a battle for survival, every breath a gift snatched from imminent death. Hours stretched on, the sky darkened, but the Americans held bravely. Against all odds, they turned the death train from a vehicle of horror into a sanctuary, at least for now. As the night closed in, Harper leaned against the cold steel of his tank, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. The faces of the prisoners, empty yet alive, haunted him. "We saved them," whispered Jenkins, eyes heavy but grateful. "But the war, it's not over for any of us." For Harper and his crew, this was more than a battle. It was a reckoning with humanity itself. The dawn broke weakly over the shattered remains of Magdeburg, casting pale light on the exhausted survivors and their reluctant rescuers. But amidst the fragile hope of salvation, a darker battle was unfolding, one not fought with guns or tanks, but with suspicion and secrets. Lieutenant Harper woke before sunrise, the weight of the previous night's horrors heavy on his mind. The train lay silent now, a rusted carcass in the cold mist. The prisoners huddled in temporary shelters, their broken bodies finally beginning to find rest. Yet Harper could not rest, not with so many questions gnawing at the edges of his resolve. Reports filtered through the chain of command, movements from enemy forces intensifying, strange disappearances among their own men, whispers of spies in their ranks. The war had turned murky, and lines between friend and foe blurred like the morning fog. Harper called a meeting with his closest officers. Eyes tired but alert, they gathered in the makeshift command post, a battered farmhouse barely standing amidst the ruins. "Men, we've survived the battle to save those on the train," Harper began, voice low but steel-laced. "Now we face threats from within. Someone's leaking our positions, feeding information to the enemy." A cold silence fell. Eyes darted accusingly. Corporal Stevens, Harper's trusted radio operator, swallowed hard. "Sir, I don't want to say it, but the timing of every attack feels like a trap laid by someone who knows us well." Harper nodded grimly. "Trust is broken until we find the traitor. We tighten security. No more secrets. Everyone is accountable." Outside, the survivors, men and women, felt the tension pulse through the camp. Among their own rescuers, uncertainty festered like an invisible poison. One prisoner, a gaunt man named Jakob, glanced nervously at the soldiers. "The Nazis are not only outside these walls, evil lurks inside." His voice cracked, eyes darting. Harper recognized the truth in Jakob's words. War had taught him that betrayal often came wrapped in familiar faces. Over the following days, Harper's unit doubled their patrols, frisked even their own, and set traps for the elusive informant. Paranoia grew, alliances frayed, yet through it all, the prisoners slowly regained strength. Some shared fragments of horrific stories, tales of betrayal behind barbed wire, of comrades turning on one another under torture and desperation. Harper found himself haunted by one story in particular. A trusted German officer who, facing defeat, betrayed dozens of innocent lives to save himself. That shadow cast a lengthening darkness over Harper's own troop. One cold evening, under the thinning stars, a sniper's bullet found Corporal Stevens. The camp erupted in chaos. The traitor had just gotten bolder. Fueled by rage and fear, Harper inspected every detail, intercepted coded messages, suspicious movements, and overheard whispers. In the depths of ruined church ruins nearby, he uncovered a hidden underground radio transmitter, a direct lifeline to the enemy command. The betrayal was real, and the true enemy was no longer just the collapsing Reich, but the rot inside their own ranks. Harper prepared his men for the fight ahead, not just for survival, but for the fragile hope of justice, trust, and humanity. As the war closed in on its final months, the danger was no longer only from bullets and bombs. It was a battle for souls, loyalty, and what was left of honor. The days following the discovery of the traitorous radio transmitter were the darkest since the train's rescue. The betrayal within their ranks weighed heavily on every soldier's mind like a shroud, casting suspicion on even the closest comrades. Lieutenant Harper could feel the growing tension in the camp, thick as the early morning fog that clung stubbornly to the ruined streets of Magdeburg. As dawn broke over the skeletal remains of the city, harsh orders were issued. No one was trusted without verification. Every man, every carriage, every shadow was scrutinized. Patrols doubled, weapons were kept at the ready, and the prisoners, once prisoners of the Nazis, now found themselves living in a cage of anxiety and fear, even as they tasted freedom. The enemy had not given up. German reinforcements, though weakened and desperate, were tightening a noose around the town. Harper was informed that SS units specialized in ruthless counterinsurgency were closing in, bent on reclaiming control and silencing any witnesses, alive or dead. The death train had become a fortress, the last beacon of hope amidst ruin, and its defenders were preparing for a siege. Harper convened his officers beneath the fractured roof of an abandoned municipal building, maps spread across a makeshift table, lit by shaky lantern light. Their discussion was terse and weighted with urgency. "We hold here," Harper began, voice low but resolute. "No retreat. If the SS breaks our line, the prisoners are recaptured or killed on the spot. We can't let that happen." Captain Willis, his second in command, nodded grimly. "Our ammunition is limited. Reinforcements are days away if they come at all." Harper glanced outside, seeing the faces of exhausted soldiers blending with the frightened prisoners, all with one silent plea: survival. The first attack came under a leaden gray sky, just after midday. The enemy unleashed a barrage of mortars and machine gun fire, shaking the earth and splintering walls. Bullets tore through the makeshift barricades, and cries of pain pierced the cacophony. Harper moved swiftly through the chaos, rallying his men, directing fire, and evacuating the wounded. Medical corps struggled heroically to treat the injured, often exposed to enemy snipers lurking in the rubble. Amidst the firefight, heroic acts arose. Private James Briggs carried a wounded prisoner through a hail of bullets to the safety of the compound cellar. Sergeant Elena Torres, a sharpshooter with a steady hand, picked off enemy scouts, buying precious minutes and morale. But the cost was evident. Walls sprayed with bullet holes, shattered glass, and bleeding bodies exposed the fragility of their defenses. As dusk settled, a brutal silence fell over the battlefield, but it was the calm before a greater storm. German forces regrouped. Under cover of darkness, Harper led a covert mission beyond the perimeter, seeking to disable enemy artillery positions threatening the camp. Navigating twisted streets and booby-trapped ruins, the team moved with calculated stealth. They struck quickly, destroying a battery of cannons and radar equipment essential for enemy coordination. But their actions came at a price. One of Harper's closest men, Corporal Davies, was captured during the retreat, his fate a chilling reminder of the stakes. Back at base, Harper knew the next days would determine their survival. The siege was tightening, the enemy relentless. Yet, in the bleakness, sparks of hope endured. The prisoners, once broken, began to organize themselves, cleaning wounds, sharing what little food remained, rebuilding fragile fragments of community. Harper found strength in their resilience. The war's end was near, but here in Magdeburg, the fight for freedom was raw, immediate, and personal. "You don't just fight for victory," Harper whispered to himself one cold night. "You fight for every soul who still breathes." The biting chill of early spring crept across the shattered remnants of Magdeburg, settling deeply into the bones of its occupants. Lieutenant Thomas Harper stood atop the rubble-strewn rooftop of a bombed-out church, scanning the fractured skyline with eyes sharpened by months of relentless warfare. Below him, the camp, once a grim enclosure of despair, had transformed into an uneasy refuge where the broken and battered clung to their fleeting chance at freedom. But hope here was tentative, fragile, and constantly threatened. In the cold light of dawn, the past and present collided with relentless force. For Harper and those he led, this was no ordinary battle. It was a war waged not only against an enemy still encroaching from the shadows, but against every scar etched deep within their souls by years of violence and loss. Inside the makeshift camp, whispered conversations in multiple languages filled the air. English, German, broken Polish, and the haunting echoes of Yiddish, voices knitting together shards of shared suffering and survival. The prisoners, once condemned to death, now began uttering stories long suppressed, tales of forced marches, secret acts of defiance, and the heartbreaking human cost they bore. Jakob, a gaunt but fiercely determined man liberated from a nearby concentration camp, emerged as an unlikely pillar of hope among the prisoners. His eyes held the hard clarity of one who had seen too much but refused to bow. Approaching Harper in the dim morning light, he spoke quietly but with urgency. "We have survived death itself. Now we must survive what remains after." Harper recognized in Jakob a leader born of necessity, someone who could help transform scattered survivors into a semblance of community and strength. Together, they began organizing small work parties to clean the camp, tending to the wounded and fortifying the perimeter against inevitable assaults. But the shadow of the enemy loomed larger. Intelligence reports confirmed that a reinforced SS battalion was assembling on the outskirts of Magdeburg, their purpose clear: to reclaim the train and annihilate any living witnesses to the atrocities carried on those rusty rails. Harper summoned his officers to a war council held in the cellar of a half-collapsed municipal building. The air was thick with tension and the scent of damp stone. Maps, torn and stained, were spread across a battered wooden table lit by a single flickering lantern. "The enemy knows what we hold," Harper said, his voice steady but resolute. "They want to extinguish this light before it can burn any brighter. We will hold, no matter the cost." Captain Elena Torres, her eyes sharp as her reflexes, laid out their defensive strategy. Trenches would be dug where possible, every broken wall and derelict building turned to a fortress. Makeshift barricades of twisted steel and rubble marked dead zones where no enemy would pass. Morale was fragile, but the determination burned fierce. Under Harper's watchful eye, and with Jakob's leadership of the camp's survivors, the community forged itself anew. Unarmed men and women were trained in weaponry, guided by Captain Torres, transforming victims into fighters. The transformation was as psychological as physical. Each soldier knew the stakes were not just survival, but reclaiming dignity denied for so long. The first real test arrived under a sky heavy with gunmetal clouds. Throughout the day, enemy mortars pounded the outskirts, sending plumes of earth and fire skyward. Sniper fire hobbled their sentries. Shadows flickered in the ruins at every turn. Harper ran from post to post, breathing orders and courage into ragged hands. It was a brutal dance of death. Tanks lunging forward, infantry clashing at barricades, desperate firefights in narrow alleys and shattered rooms. Private James Briggs, a medic with hands steady despite shaking knees, risked his life moving through swirling bullets to tend the wounded. Sergeant Torres provided deadly cover, her rifle thundering as she picked off enemy marksmen. Yet the hours dragged cruelly on. Friends fell beside Harper, some screaming their last words, others silent shadows slipping away into death's icy embrace. As dusk bled into night, a brief quiet settled, but the wounds were raw and the enemy's intent clear. Harper moved through the camp and found Jakob beside a hastily constructed fire, surrounded by broken men and women clutching shreds of food and hope. "We endure," Jakob said simply, eyes reflecting the flicker of flames. "Because if we do not, who remembers? Who fights?" The words hung heavy. This was their crucible. Fight fading humanity or become a new kind of death. Harper whispered a vow into the cold night air. To hold this fragile sanctuary, to fight for every heartbeat, every breath, for the delicate flame of hope glowing faintly in the ruins of a fallen world. The battle raged not just for survival, but for the reclamation of souls shattered by war. Spring began to take a tentative hold of the ruined city, yet the chill in the air mirrored a growing unease that haunted the camp like a specter. Lieutenant Harper knew that victory now hinged on much more than trenches and gunfire. It was a battle waged in minds, hearts, and broken relationships. The aftershocks of the recent brutal skirmishes rippled unevenly through the ranks. Scarred bodies healed more slowly than trust. Every day brought new challenges, not merely from outside enemies, but from within, as cracks began to form in the fragile camaraderie that held the ragtag band of soldiers and survivors together. Rumors spread like wildfire, whispers of betrayal, fractured loyalties, and voices questioning command decisions. Division stirred amidst desperation. Even the bond between Harper and Captain Elena Torres was tested. Elena, fierce and unflinching, blamed leadership decisions for unnecessary losses during the last battle. Tension simmered beneath professional facades. Arguments shot sparks in the officers' quarters, words sharp enough to cut deeper than any bullet. Into this volatile mix stormed Jakob, the liberated prisoner turned reluctant leader. His quiet strength was a balm, yet also a reminder. Survival required unity. But unity demanded sacrifices and concessions many were unwilling to make. One evening, as the camp settled under a tense darkness interrupted by distant gunfire, Harper convened a rare gathering of men and women, from grizzled combat veterans to former prisoners taking first shaky steps toward soldiering. Around a cracked wooden table painstakingly cleaned for the occasion, voices rose and fell. Harper's voice was steady, yet heavy. "We're here because we share a cause bigger than ourselves. Our success depends on holding this line together, no matter what lies behind our fears and doubts." For hours, stories were exchanged. Painful memories, moments of courage, longings for lost families, and peace. Some confessions spilled out raw and unfiltered, exposing fractures beneath the surface. Among the prisoners, a young woman, Marta, stood hesitantly to speak. Her story was harrowing, separated from her family in a Nazi roundup, enduring days without food or water, but refusing to surrender hope. Her voice trembled but carried undeniable strength. "We've lost everything," she said softly, "but not each other, not if we don't let hatred tear us apart." That fragile thread held the room silent, staring at shadows dancing against the walls. But shadows were not the only threat. A breach was reported in the camp's supply lines, sabotage suspected. Harper's worst fears stirred once again. A cadre of soldiers was dispatched on a perilous mission to root out the saboteurs and restore order. Harper chose to lead it himself, refusing to delegate what was his responsibility alone. The party ventured beyond the camp's fragile defenses into the smoking ruins of the city, threading through bombed-out streets haunted by the echoes of screams. Every corner held danger, every shadow could conceal an enemy, or worse, traitor. They discovered caches of missing supplies hidden away, fuel, food, ammunition, stashed by men disguised as allies. Confrontations erupted amid shattered concrete and twisted metal. A bitter fight left several wounded, and the betrayal was deeper than Harper had imagined. Some within his own ranks sought personal survival over collective salvation. Returning to the camp, Harper was met by a turbulent blend of relief and suspicion. The sense of brotherhood had waned, but the need for it was more urgent than ever. Late that night, Harper penned a letter home. Unspoken words poured onto paper, his fears, hopes, and the weight of command. He understood now with painful clarity that this war was no longer only against the enemy outside, but the fractures inside their own fragile alliance. The battle ahead would require not only guns and grit, but the courage to forgive, unite, and fight for a future beyond the ruins. As dawn crept over Magdeburg once more, Lieutenant Harper prepared his weary men. The fight for survival was far from over, but the fight for their souls had only just begun. The oppressive night swallowed the shattered city of Magdeburg like a ravenous beast. But from the twisted wreckage and shattered streets emerged a spark, small yet fierce, a flicker of resistance against the encroaching darkness. Lieutenant Harper stood amid the shadows, every sense taut and alert. The battle was no longer just for survival, it was for the soul of every man and woman clutching hope beneath the bombed-out sky. The theft of supplies had fractured the fragile trust inside the camp, leaving many uncertain who could still be counted on. Yet amidst this chaos, Harper sensed something else, a hunger for vengeance, for action. Passive endurance was over. Now was the time for the desperate, the brave, for flames to burn in the night. Harper called a clandestine meeting with his closest commanders and a few trusted prisoners who had demonstrated courage and wisdom beyond their scars. In the cellar of a ruined bakery, lit only by the flicker of lanterns and muffled sounds from the restless camp, plans were whispered. Audacious, perilous, necessary. "We cannot wait for relief," Harper said, voice low yet commanding. To survive, we must take the fight to them, strike their supply lines, disrupt their communications, show them that this death train has become a graveyard for their hopes, not ours. Captain Elena Torres tightened her jaw, eyes flashing steel. It's suicide to split our forces, she warned, but it's the only thing that can turn the tide. Jakob, the survivor turned organizer, nodded gravely. I will lead a group through the outskirts. We know these streets better than anyone. We'll hit them where it hurts. That night, armed with rifles, grenades scavenged from rubble, and a burning will, the small raiding party slipped like ghosts through the ruined city. Silence was their ally. Every step was a tightrope walk between life and oblivion. They ambushed supply wagons, detonated caches, and captured scouts, fragments of resistance growing from the ashes of despair. But the enemy was ruthless and vigilant. When they discovered the sabotage, a brutal retaliation followed, innocents caught in the crossfire, shells raining down on the camp. Harper's heart broke seeing the flames leap into the dark sky, smoke smothering the fragile village of tents and shelters. Every earned victory had a devastating price. During a fierce firefight near a shattered bridge, Harper confronted a German officer, a young man whose hatred burned fiercely, yet in his eyes lingered a flicker of doubt, another prisoner of the war machine. Words were exchanged amid the chaos, words about loss, loyalty, and a future none dared hope for. The skirmish left Harper wounded, his body aching but his spirit stronger. Among the wounded, Private Briggs's smile shone faintly as he pled for help for others. Back at camp, the survivors tended wounds, both physical and emotional. The night had carved new lines on every face, but it had ignited a fire none could extinguish. In whispered prayers and quiet defiance, they believed in one thing: the dawn would come, not merely as light, but as a promise of salvation. Harper, gazing at the first faint stars, whispered into the darkness, "We are more than prisoners." The dawn arrived reluctantly, as though hesitant to witness the carnage that awaited. Lieutenant Harper rose from his makeshift bed, a tattered blanket spread over cold stone, his body screaming from wounds sustained the night before. But pain was a distant companion now, overshadowed by the weight of command and the knowledge that their fragile sanctuary stood on the precipice of annihilation. The enemy was closing in. Intelligence reports, delivered by haggard scouts who had risked their lives navigating the ruins, painted a grim picture. A massive SS force, reinforced with heavy artillery and armored divisions, was preparing for a final overwhelming assault. The noose was tightening, and time was slipping through their fingers like sand. Harper convened an emergency meeting with his officers and key representatives from the survivor community. The atmosphere was thick with tension, faces gaunt and shadowed by sleepless nights and unrelenting fear. Yet beneath the exhaustion, a fierce determination flickered, a refusal to surrender, even in the face of impossible odds. "We're outnumbered, outgunned, and running low on everything," Captain Torres said bluntly, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. "But we have something they don't. We know what we're fighting for." Jakob, standing beside her, his once skeletal frame now bearing the marks of a leader forged in fire, nodded slowly. "They fight for a dying ideology. We fight for life itself." Harper studied the map spread before them, tracing lines of defense and identifying weak points. The camp's defenses were patchwork at best, barricades cobbled together from rubble, trenches dug with bare hands, and weapons scavenged from fallen enemies. Yet they had held this ground through sheer will and sacrifice. "We fortify the eastern perimeter," Harper ordered, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "Every able-bodied person, soldier or survivor, takes a position. We hold until reinforcements arrive, or we hold until we can't anymore." The hours that followed were a blur of frantic preparation. Trenches were deepened, ammunition distributed, and every scrap of metal and wood repurposed into obstacles designed to slow the enemy advance. The survivors, once broken and helpless, now worked alongside soldiers, their hands calloused but determined. Marta, the young woman who had spoken so movingly days before, organized a group to tend to the wounded and prepare emergency evacuation routes. Her quiet strength inspired others, transforming fear into purpose. As the sun climbed higher, casting harsh light over the ruined city, the first distant rumble of artillery fire echoed across the landscape. The battle was beginning. Harper took his position at the front lines, rifle in hand, surrounded by men and women who had become more than comrades. They were family, bound by blood and shared suffering. He glanced at the faces around him: Torres, her jaw set with grim resolve; Briggs, the medic whose gentle hands had saved countless lives; and Jakob, standing tall despite the horrors he had endured. The enemy emerged from the smoke and rubble like a tide of steel and fury. Tanks rumbled forward, their guns roaring, while infantry advanced in tight formations, their shouts mingling with the thunder of explosions. The earth shook beneath the onslaught, and the air filled with the acrid stench of gunpowder and burning flesh. Harper's world narrowed to the chaos around him. He fired, reloaded, and fired again, his movements mechanical, yet fueled by a primal need to protect those behind him. Bullets whizzed past, slamming into walls and bodies with sickening thuds. Screams pierced the cacophony, cries of pain, rage, and defiance. The camp's defenders fought with ferocity born of desperation. Torres commanded a machine gun nest, her shots precise and deadly, cutting down advancing soldiers with ruthless efficiency. Jakob led a group of survivors armed with makeshift weapons, their inexperience offset by sheer courage. But the enemy was relentless. Wave after wave crashed against their defenses, each assault more brutal than the last. Harper watched as friends fell around him, their lives snuffed out in an instant. The cost of holding this ground was staggering, yet retreat was unthinkable. As the battle raged into the afternoon, a critical moment arrived. A group of enemy soldiers breached the eastern barricade, pouring into the camp with vicious intent. Harper rallied a desperate counterattack, leading a charge that drove the invaders back through sheer force of will. The fighting was savage, hand-to-hand combat in narrow spaces where every movement could mean life or death. Harper's body moved on instinct, fueled by adrenaline and the faces of those depending on him. He grappled with an enemy soldier, their struggle ending only when Jakob intervened, saving Harper's life with a blow from a commandeered rifle. Breathing heavily, Harper clasped Jakob's shoulder. "We hold," he gasped, "no matter what." Jacob nodded, his eyes blazing. "We hold." As dusk began to settle, the enemy assault finally faltered. The cost had been horrific. Bodies littered the ground, and the air was thick with smoke and the moans of the wounded. But they had held. Against all odds, they had survived another day. Harper walked among the survivors, offering words of comfort and gratitude. Every face he saw was etched with pain, yet also with something else: pride. They had fought not just for survival, but for dignity, for humanity, for the belief that even in the darkest hour, light could endure. That night, as fires burned low and exhausted fighters collapsed into uneasy sleep, Harper stood watch once more. The stars above seemed impossibly distant, yet their cold light offered a fragile promise. Dawn would come again, and with it, another chance to fight, to hope, to live. The morning air was heavy with the scent of smoke and the whispers of silent prayers. Lieutenant Thomas Harper stared across the battered landscape from his vantage point atop the ruined church steeple. Below, the survivors and soldiers moved with lethargic precision, each face marked by exhaustion, pain, but also an unyielding spark of defiance. The battle for Magdeburg had stretched beyond months now. Every day was a struggle against overwhelming odds, against the trauma that threatened to consume them all. But Harper knew they stood on a precipice, not just of battle, but of history itself. Reports had come through in hushed urgency. The enemy was reorganizing, gathering strength for what promised to be a final desperate effort to reclaim lost ground. This was the moment when all would be decided, the line between survival and annihilation. Inside the camp, the atmosphere simmered with a tense, brittle quiet. The wounded were tended with diminishing supplies, nerves frayed like wires stretched too thin. Yet amidst the despair, moments of humanity shone brightly. Laughter shared in fleeting breaks, hands clasped tightly in solidarity, songs whispered in the night. Harper moved among his men and women, offering words of encouragement, steadying trembling shoulders. He found solace in small acts, a soldier sharing scarce rations, a medic refusing to give up despite the chaos. Jacob approached quietly, shadows playing across his solemn features. "They plan to cut us off at the river," he said. "If they succeed, we'll be trapped, no way out." Harper's jaw tightened. The river was their lifeline, the last artery feeding hope and possible rescue. Losing it would mean the end. "Prepare for the worst," Harper ordered, his voice cold steel. "But fight like hell to defend that crossing. We hold the river, or this fight is finished." As day faded into twilight, scouts reported movement, battle-ready enemy forces gathering near the banks, artillery batteries lighting up the dusk like deadly stars. The camp braced. Harper coordinated defenses like a general orchestrating a symphony of violence. Trenches were deepened along the riverbank. Snipers took positions in fractured buildings overlooking approaches. Explosive traps were laid in the shadows. That night, bathed in uneasy silence, Harper couldn't sleep. His thoughts churned with memories, faces of fallen comrades, cries of suffering, the weight of every life depending on him. Near the dying embers of the campfire, Captain Elena Torres joined him, eyes reflecting a mingling of pain and resolve. "We've come so far," she said softly, voice barely above the crackling fire. "But how do we hold against a tide that will not stop?" Harper closed his eyes briefly, then met her gaze. "Because surrender is not an option, because these people, these survivors, they're counting on us, on me, on you." At dawn, the enemy struck. The river became a tempest of fire and steel. Shells tore through earth and timber, turning the muddy banks into shattered graveyards. Infantry assaults came in crashing waves, soldiers charging through hailstorms of bullets and shrapnel. Harper's tank battered enemy lines, firing relentlessly. Around him, men and women fought with desperate valor, making every inch of ground bleed with determination. The night was punctuated by screams, orders, the crackle of gunfire echoing like a cruel symphony. Harper found himself in the thick of it, shielding a group of refugees, rallying faltering squads, witnessing sacrifice raw and brutal. Amidst the chaos, a mortar round exploded nearby, throwing Harper to the ground. Pain seared through his side, but he forced himself up. No time for weakness. The battle stretched long into the night, but through tenacity and sheer will, the defenders held the river crossing. As dawn broke, Harper surveyed the ruin, the cost laid bare, friends lost, ground soaked with sacrifice. Yet their gambit had succeeded. The lifeline remained, fragile but unbroken. Exhausted, Harper collapsed beside Jacob. "We crossed a brink," he said hoarsely. "But the war, the suffering, it's far from over." Jacob nodded, eyes scanning the horizon where smoke and storm mingled. "But for the first time in a long while," he whispered, "we still stand." The sun barely pierced through the heavy clouds over Magdeburg, a pale glow struggling to illuminate the shattered city below. Lieutenant Thomas Harper stood at the edge of the camp, shoulders hunched against a biting wind. Every step forward was a defiance of exhaustion, of despair, and the haunting memories embedded in every scar and shattered building around him. They had held the line, had fought tooth and nail to protect the prisoners now nestled in the fragile safety of this temporary sanctuary. But Harper knew the enemy was planning its final, most brutal push. The time was near when all would come to a head. It was no longer just about survival. It was about ending the nightmare once and for all. Orders arrived. An offensive was imminent. The SS, reinforced by desperate werewolf units, were massing in the ruins, preparing to crush the resistance and erase the last witnesses to their crimes. Harper gathered his officers in the cramped cellar command post. Maps were laid out amidst flickering candlelight, showing the fractured streets, rubble-choked riverbanks, and vulnerable supply lines. "We strike first," Harper declared, voice strong but grim. "We disrupt their preparations, unsettle their command. We cannot hold passively. We must act." Captain Elena Torres volunteered to lead the assault team, bolstered by a cadre of hardened soldiers and volunteers drawn from the survivors. Jacob, wielding more than just hope now, coordinated clandestine intelligence efforts, a network of lookouts, messengers, and informants, risking all to gather information. Harper and his men prepared for the night's raid, precise, ruthless, and with no margin for error. As darkness folded the city into shadows, Harper's unit set out, moving like ghosts through twisted alleys and overshadowed bridges. Every rustle of leaves and distant shout echoed like thunder in the tense silence. They struck swiftly, sabotaging supply depots, destroying ammunition stockpiles, and dismantling communication lines critical to enemy coordination. The attack created chaos and confusion for the enemy, forcing frenetic redeployments and frantic countermeasures. But the victory was bittersweet. In a fierce firefight near the factory district, Harper's trusted radio operator, Corporal Stevens, fell, a bullet cracking the cold night as he relayed their last message. The cost settled heavily on Harper's shoulders, mingling with the pain of earlier losses. Returning to camp, they were hailed as heroes, but Harper could see the weariness in every face. The war had aged them beyond their years. In the following days, whispers circulated. Reports of brutal reprisals by the enemy on villages nearby, tortured executions and scorched earth tactics. The stakes were higher than ever. Despite dwindling supplies and rising casualties, the defenders fortified their resolve. Medical teams, led by Private Briggs with unyielding compassion, worked tirelessly to save lives amid sickness and despair. Harper confided in Jakob one evening, the two men staring over the cityscape lit by research fires. "We're the last barrier," Harper said quietly. "If we fall, the darkness spreads beyond this place." Jakob's eyes reflected both pain and fierce determination. "Then we do not fall. We fight for every soul, every memory." That night, the enemy launched their final assault. Torn between hope and horror, Harper led his men into the maelstrom, a desperate symphony of gunfire, explosions, and cries echoing through ruined streets. The battle raged longer and fiercer than any before. Close combat surged through every ruined building and forsaken alley, soldiers fighting tooth and nail to protect what little light remained. Harper moved through the inferno, rallying his men, patching wounds, witnessing sacrifice etched in the deepest places of human courage. Amidst the swirling flames and smoke, victory's edge lay razor thin. As dawn broke over a city scarred by blood and valor, the survivors stood battered but unbroken. Harper looked over their weary faces and knew the fight was almost over. But the cost, the memories, would remain forever etched in the heart of darkness they had crossed. The city of Magdeburg was a haunted shell of its former self, a tangle of shattered stone and twisted steel carved painfully by months of unrelenting warfare. Lieutenant Thomas Harper stood amid this ruin, his senses acutely tuned to every distant sound, every ghostly echo of a city on the brink. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and the bitter tang of loss, yet beneath it all burned an unyielding ember of hope, stoked by every sacrifice made. Inside their camp, once a place of hopeless captivity, now a fragile bastion, soldiers and survivors moved as one, their faces etched with exhaustion, but also hardened determination. Yet the knowledge that the Nazi high command was planning a desperate final escape loomed like a pall over them all. The death train was more than a relic of horror. It was the last thread holding the remnants of tyranny together. Weeks of intelligence gathering had uncovered a grim plan. Under cover of darkness, a secret evacuation train would attempt to flee the collapsing Reich, carrying away stolen gold, secret documents, and the Nazis desperate to evade justice. The stakes were unmistakable, a last chance for the enemy, and a final obstacle for Harper and his allies. Under the fractured walls of a bombed-out cathedral, Harper convened a council with his top officers and trusted survivor leaders. The low light flickered off maps sprawled on a battered wooden table, tracing rail lines through ruined neighborhoods and key enemy positions. Captain Elena Torres outlined a daring strike plan: infiltrate under cover of night, sabotage the train before it could depart, and prevent the escape at any cost. Jakob, whose leadership had become the heartbeat of the camp's community, emphasized coordinating diversions within the city to pull enemy forces away from the rail yard, buying time for the assault team. The mood was grave, but resolute. "This mission will decide if we are the last flicker of justice or if darkness will descend again," Harper declared, locking eyes with every man and woman in the room. "We move fast, strike hard, and leave no room for failure." Long before dawn, Harper and his hand-picked team slipped silently into the cold night, navigating treacherous alleys layered with rubble and danger. Every shadow could harbor death. The ruined city itself seemed to hold its breath in ominous anticipation. Suddenly, gunfire shattered the silence. SS guards had detected their approach. The night erupted into chaos. Harper dove behind twisted metal, firing relentlessly, the sharp bark of rifles and the thunder of explosions weaving into a cacophonous battle. Elena Torres was hit amid the firefight, a blast tearing through her side. Despite the searing pain, her spirit blazed fierce, her commands rallying their forces amidst the deadly chaos. Jakob's diversions flared in the distance, fires lit, alarms raised, drawing enemy patrols away and striking confusion into their ranks. The coordinated assault was turning the tide. Amid screeches of metal and bursts of flame, Harper's team placed charges on the locomotives and destroyed critical communication lines, severing the enemy's last hopes of orderly retreat. The explosion rolled through the city like thunder, shaking the ground beneath their feet. But victory demanded sacrifice. Corporal Stevens, Harper's trusted radio operator and confidant, fell near their extraction point, delivering final messages with his dying breath. The team retreated through smoke and rubble back to camp, warriors battered but victorious. That night, as fires lit the horizon and a fragile calm settled over Magdeburg, Harper confided in Jakob. The war still lived in shadows, and so must they. "The darkness has been delayed," he whispered, voice heavy but hopeful. "But it is not defeated." Jakob's gaze was steady, filled with both grief and defiance. "We hold the flame for all those lost and those yet to come." As dawn broke quietly, painting the ruined city in pale gold, the survivors knew the brutal fight was almost over. Yet the scars, the memories, and the hope forged in fire would remain unbroken forever. The cold light of dawn crept quietly over Magdeburg's battered skyline, casting long shadows across ruins, still heavy with the echoes of war. Lieutenant Thomas Harper stood silent among the shattered remains, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but burning with the clarity of survival and purpose. This was their moment, one born from countless sacrifices, blood, and unyielding hope. The final battle had left the city scarred and its defenders weary. Yet as the Allies closed in, so too did a fragile peace emerge, tinged with the heavy cost of victory. Harper could feel it in the air, a shifting tide not only of war, but of history itself. The prisoners, once doomed to vanish into darkness aboard the death train, now moved cautiously toward an uncertain future. Inside the camp, the survivors gathered in small groups. Faces once gaunt and darkened with despair now showed tentative signs of life. Children, the faintest symbol of renewal, were cradled with hard-won tenderness. Jakob spoke softly to those around him, weaving together words of remembrance and promise. Harper watched as Captain Elena Torres tended to her own wounds with quiet determination, a beacon of strength despite her battered form. Nearby, Private Briggs distributed what little food remained with quiet grace, each ration a lifeline. Amid the wreckage, Harper and his officers began organizing the painstaking process of aid and reconstruction. Medical aid stations stretched into the streets. Search parties scoured for survivors still trapped beneath rubble. Documents and evidence were gathered to ensure the atrocities seen here would not be forgotten. Harper's thoughts drifted to those lost, comrades who had fallen in the relentless storms of gunfire and sacrifice. Their voices lingered like ghosts in his mind. He vowed their names, their courage, would be etched beyond the torn walls here, immortalized in the story of these final days. But the shadow of war's cruelty was not yet behind them. Trials awaited, the reckoning of those who perpetrated horrors, and the bitter aftermath that tested the hearts of all involved. Harper understood that healing was a path longer and harder than any battlefield march. He found himself standing beside Jakob at the train station platform, the hollow carcass where so much suffering had been born, and miraculously, so many lives spared. "Look at this," Jakob said, voice raw with emotion. "From this darkness, we have forged a glimmer of light. Our fight was more than battles and bullets. It was for memory, truth, and the soul of humanity." Harper nodded slowly. We carry their stories. We bear witness. We promise they will never be forgotten. The sun broke fully over the horizon, warm and forgiving. The survivors gathered to light candles, a silent vigil nestled within the ruins. Though the war had left scars too deep to erase, this dawn marked a beginning, a fragile new chapter where courage met compassion and where the future could be reclaimed from the ashes of the past. Lieutenant Harper breathed deeply, the weight of command easing as hope's fragile flame grew stronger. The train, once a symbol of death, now stood as a stark reminder that even in the darkest hours, humanity could endure, fight back, and rise. And as peace slowly settled over Magdeburg, those who had survived carried forward a solemn vow to remember, to heal, and to never let history repeat its darkest days.